How do you adapt Fallout without destroying the very thing fans love about it? That was the real challenge facing Amazon's Fallout. Because this was never just another video game adaptation. Fallout is one of those rare franchises where the tone matters as much as the story. It's violent, funny, tragic, grotesque, nostalgic, and strangely sincere, often all in the same moment. Get even one of those ingredients wrong, and it stops feeling like Fallout. And that's exactly why the series became so fascinating before audiences had even seen a full episode. Instead of adapting one game directly, the creators made a choice that changed everything. They told a new story set inside the established Fallout universe. That meant the show wasn't trying to recreate a player's exact experience or compress a massive role-playing game into a single linear plot. It was doing something much riskier, expanding the world while still honoring the rules, themes, and history that fans already knew. And according to official statements from the creative team and Bethesda, that world is meant to be part of the franchise's canon. That detail matters more than it might seem. Because once a show is considered part of canon, every design choice, faction detail, historical reference, and piece of world building carries more weight. The series couldn't just look like Time's Fallout. It had to feel as if it belonged there. It had to sit beside the games, not just imitate them from a distance. That pressure can be seen in almost every frame. One of the most impressive achievements of the series is its visual identity. Fallout Times has always had a very specific aesthetic, a retro-futuristic America frozen in the cultural imagination of the mid-20th century, then shattered by nuclear catastrophe. It's a world of cheerful advertising, chrome surfaces, domestic optimism, and smiling corporate mascots, all surrounded by ruin, decay, and moral collapse. That contrast is the heart of the franchise, and the show understands it immediately. The production design embraces the clean lines, bright colors, stylized technology, and corporate polish that define pre-war times Fallout, then smashes those elements into the dirt of the wasteland. Vault interiors feel controlled, sterile, and almost comforting. The outside world feels unstable, improvised, and predatory. That visual split tells the audience something important before the characters even speak. In Time's Fallout, order is never as safe as it looks, and chaos is never as simple as it seems. That same care extends to the practical side of the production. One reason the world feels so convincing is that the series did not rely purely on digital spectacle. The show used physical sets, location shooting, costumes, props, and makeup to create a wasteland with real texture, and that texture matters. In a setting like this, viewers need to believe that metal is heavy, dust is choking, armor is worn down, and every object has passed through countless hands before arriving on screen. That tactile quality gives the series something many large-scale genre productions struggle to maintain: a sense of physical reality. You can feel it in the walls of the vaults. You can feel it in the costumes. You can feel it in the cracked surfaces, rusted materials, and improvised gear. Nothing important about the world is supposed to feel new. Even the most polished spaces in Times, Fallout Times, are hiding rot beneath the surface. And nowhere is that idea more important than in the vaults themselves. The vaults are not just a visual signature of the franchise, they are one of its darkest storytelling tools. In the games, vaults often represent the lie at the center of Time's Fallout, the promise of safety, progress, and control masking something manipulative, cruel, or deeply unethical. The TV series preserves that tension. It uses the vault not simply as a bunker, but as a system, one that shapes behavior, limits knowledge, and creates a version of reality that may be clean on the surface, but unstable underneath. That makes Lucy such a smart entry point into the story. Played by Ella Purnell, Lucy begins as a character whose worldview is still shaped by that controlled environment. She enters the wasteland carrying optimism, rules, and a belief that systems exist for a reason. And that perspective gives the audience a natural path into the world. Through her, the series can reveal just how absurd, cruel, and unpredictable the surface really is. But Lucy is only one side of Fallout. The show's structure becomes much more interesting because it doesn't stop with a single point of view. Alongside Lucy, the series follows Maximus and the Ghoul, and that three-part design is one of its strongest storytelling decisions. It reflects something essential about the games. Fallout Times has never been about one moral lens. It's about conflicting systems, clashing values, and the gap between what people believe they are and what they become when survival takes over. Maximus represents one of the franchise's most important institutions, the Brotherhood of Steel. And the Brotherhood is a perfect test of whether an adaptation truly understands Time's fallout. In simpler storytelling, the Brotherhood could easily have been reduced to armored heroes, noble protectors, or straightforward villains. But the games have rarely treated them that way. Depending on the title, the chapter, and the perspective, the Brotherhood can look disciplined, arrogant, protective, authoritarian, honorable, or dangerous. The show preserves that ambiguity. It presents the Brotherhood as powerful and structured, but also shaped by hierarchy, ideology, and control. That complexity makes them feel true to the source material. Then there's the Ghoul, played by Walton Goggins, one of the most visually striking and thematically important characters in the entire series. The Ghoul isn't just another wasteland survivor. He represents endurance, memory, and the long afterlife of the old world. In Time's fallout, time itself is a character. The past never really disappears. It lingers in propaganda, technology, architecture, buried secrets, and people who have survived long enough to remember what came before. The Ghoul carries that history with him, and Goggins' performance gives the character a mixture of menace, weariness, and dark humor that fits the series remarkably well. His transformation also highlights another key production choice: practical makeup and physical performance. That matters because a world like Time's Fallout Times can easily become too slick if every creature, mutation, or injury feels entirely digital. The more tactile the effects are, the more the violence and strangeness of the wasteland seem rooted in reality. For a series balancing satire with horror, that grounded physicality is incredibly important. And then there's the creative team behind it all. The series was developed by Geneva Robertson-Dworet and Graham Wagner, with Jonathan Nolan directing the premiere episode. Nolan's involvement brought immediate attention, but more importantly, it suggested a certain scale of ambition. The opening episode had to do an enormous amount of work. It needed to establish the world, explain the rules, introduce multiple characters, sell the visual style, and convince skeptical viewers that Time's Fallout's Time's impossible tone could survive in live action. That tone was always the real test. Because Times, Fallout Times, is not simply dark science fiction. It's a satire of militarism, consumer culture, corporate power, and national myth-making. At the same time, it's also a character-driven survival story set in a brutal world. If the show leaned too far into comedy, it would undercut the danger. If it leaned too far into seriousness, it would lose the bizarre irony that defines the franchise. What makes the adaptation work is that it allows beauty, horror, absurdity, and cruelty to occupy the same scene without flattening any of them. That balance also shows up in how the series handles violence. Fallout Times has always been brutal, but its violence is rarely detached from the world's larger satire. In this universe, smiling ad campaigns, family-friendly mascots, polished branding, and catastrophic brutality often exist side by side. That combination is disturbing by design. The show understands that violence in Time's Fallout Times isn't only about shock, it's about contrast. It's about what happens when the language of comfort survives long after the moral systems behind it have collapsed. Another reason the series connected with both fans and newcomers is that it resists a common adaptation trap. It doesn't drown itself in references just to prove loyalty to the games. Yes, longtime fans can spot familiar factions, technologies, visual motifs, and bits of lore, but the story still functions cleanly for viewers who know nothing about the franchise. That balance is extremely difficult to achieve. Too many inside references can make a series feel closed off. Too few, and it feels generic. Fallout Times succeeds because it uses lore as foundation, not decoration. The world is specific, but the storytelling remains accessible. And beneath all of that spectacle, the series holds on to one of the franchise's deepest ideas. Fallout has always been about systems, about who builds them, who benefits from them, who is trapped inside them, and who is forced to pay the cost when they fail. Governments fail, corporations lie. Institutions become self-protective. Technology outlasts ethics. And even after the bombs fall, people keep rebuilding the same structures of power that helped create the disaster in the first place. That theme is one of the reasons Fallout Times has lasted so long as a franchise. The Wasteland is memorable, but the real subject has never been destruction alone. It's repetition. It's the terrifying possibility that humanity can survive catastrophe without learning very much from it. And that may be the most faithful thing about the show. Not that it recreated armor, weapons, or vault suits. Not that it got the logo, the music cues, or the visual references right. Those things matter, but they are only the surface. What really matters is that the series understands the central irony of Time's Fallout. The end of the world did not erase human nature. It exposed it. That's why the best parts of the show don't just remind viewers of the games. They remind us what the games were always really about. A ruined future built out of old promises. A polished system hiding corruption. A joke that turns tragic the longer you look at it. And people trying to stay human in a world designed to strip that away. In the end, Fallout worked not because it copied the games, but because it understood their soul. It knew the wasteland had to be dangerous. It knew the satire had to sting. It knew the world had to feel old, broken, and strangely alive. And most importantly, it knew that beneath all the radiation, armor, and ruins, Fallout has always been a story about power, memory, and survival. And that's what makes this adaptation worth remembering. It didn't just visit the wasteland, it understood why it still matters.